but we did it for 15 years, and it was,
I would have loved to do it.
yeah.
Instead, I write a dumb book.
I started reading it, Many Lanes Into That was the end of it. I never got a chance to. So I'm going to buy one.
Absolutely. It will have your name on it.
How much do they cost?
$14.95. Oh, so I'll give you a nickel back and you have $15.
I probably do. You can keep the nickel.
Oh, I like them being tipped. It's the way people do it these days.
Oh, okay. Oh, start getting that money.
And I'm not going to record it on the internet.
Oh, okay.
Showtime.
Okay.
You don't have to go in the sacristy and then come out. Okay, what did you first say? Preferred spot? Okay, I love your outfit too. Amazing, really. Like school, right? Yeah, right. Victory. Oh, okay, I thought I go.
So before we get started formally, I want to test something with you all. We've had a lot of events here in the past, and when we put people on chairs up here, it's hard for people to see the people in the chairs. Is that true right now? Is it kind of hard to see me? No? Everybody can see me pretty well? Okay, because I still would, authors, when you're doing a reading, if you'd go to the lectern for the reading, but otherwise we might be able to just pass this to each other. Thanks. So good afternoon. Hi, I'm Pastor Lisa Bates Froyland. I've served here at Redeemer for the past 13 years, and I'm so glad that you are spending this afternoon with us. Every time I do one of these, I have three little sentences here, and some of them aren't even sentences. So the first is welcome to Redeemer. The second is I'm, and I covered that. I'm Lisa Bates Froyland. And then the next one is bathrooms. So should you need a bathroom, there's one in the narthex in the back there. But then also, if you go up these steps and turn to the right, there's a men's room and then a ladies' room as well. And I believe we have some waters that came upstairs. Is that right? Where is she? So there's some bottles of water. Today is a hot day at Redeemer. Some days are cold days at Redeemer. Some days are hot. We don't know which one they're going to be until we're here. So it's a hot day at Redeemer. So if you get a bit parched, help yourself to some water there on the front pew. So this afternoon, we have two stories held within two books, both released within months of each other this year. One author, raised in Milwaukee with strong German influences, attending this Lutheran church. Her book shares stories of growing up in the 50s and 60s with two siblings. The other author, raised near Chicago with strong Irish influences, attended Catholic schools and church. Her book shared stories of growing up in the 1960s and 70s with 7 siblings. What do they have in common? Close family members who are experiencing mental illness and addiction. I read these books side by side this summer, and I'm so pleased to present them side by side this afternoon. So we welcome Meg Kissinger and Katie Martin, and I want to thank them both with something sweet crafted by Redeemer's very own honeybees. Redeemer is fiercely committed to enhancing the mental health and spiritual wellness of people in this neighborhood. We are well into a renovation project that will at one point touch the entire church, And the section over there is really dedicated to our community services. And some of them on the lower level will include offices for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we have NAMI people who are here, and they are a co-sponsor of this event. Thank you, NAMI. And also the Bread of Healing Clinics will have a fourth branch here offering social work and mental health services. Because substance use and disuse is so common in this population, especially those who also have mental illness diagnoses, we will also have outpatient treatment for substance use disorder here by Serenity Inns. So all of those outreach services have come under a new umbrella that we've called OLGA. And OLGA, Neighborhood Wellness Services, is a new independent 501c3 and is brand new. So any donations that come out of your hearts today and out of your wallets can be placed in that jar next to the picture of Olga, who is the mother of Katie. And she was an incredible cook who did a lot of cooking in the old kitchen here. And she also, there are many ways that it's connected. It makes sense that we named it after your mother. So thank you. Let's see, that's what I wanted to tell you. We'll begin today with short readings from both authors, and then I have a few questions for each of them, and I'll give them a chance to talk to each other, which I see they do very naturally, and then a few moments for your questions. There'll be a microphone in the aisle for you to come up to, but if that's difficult, just raise your hand and I can come by with the handheld to field your questions. And as the program part ends, then book signing can happen here, and contributions to Olga over there. So I want to launch into the program by introducing Meg Kissinger, an award-winning investigative journalist and visiting professor in journalism at Columbia University. She was born in Wilmette, Illinois, and attended Regina Dominican High School. She graduated from DePauw University in 1979. Lucky for us, and I mean this, much of her career in journalism was spent writing for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Kissinger's extensive and heartbreaking investigation of the failures of the mental health system resulted in articles that were so descriptive that they directly inspired my commitment to this neighborhood. Since late summer, Ms. Kissinger has been appearing in broadcast and print media and in person to share her 2023 book, While You Were Out, an intimate family portrait of mental illness in an era of silence. And we will hear a sample of that book right now. Let us welcome Meg Kissinger.
Thank you so much. It is such a joy to be here, and I'm so excited to meet Katie and to be with all of you. So many, many thanks. Pastor Lisa, I am in your debt. And I've never done a reading. Isn't that funny? I've talked a lot about this book, but you're my first audience for a reading. So I'm not going to read very much because, I don't know. We've all had carbohydrates at lunchtime, and we know what happens when people are reading after you've eaten. But anyway, Lisa had asked if I would pick a selection that speaks to when I first kind of figured out that there was mental illness in the family, and the most logical place was at the start of chapter 3. So I'm just going to read 3 pages. And the title of this chapter is called Secret Hiding Places. And just one little setup that I think I need to brace you for. So we called my dad Homer. It's just a silly nickname that we gave him kind of late in the game, but I refer to him in the book throughout as Homer. His name was really Bill, but everybody had silly nicknames in our family, and that was one of them. Okay. Here's the first clue that I had that something strange was going on in my family that no one was willing to discuss. In late July 1963, a few weeks shy of my 6th birthday, I dashed downstairs for breakfast to discover that my mother was gone. No warning, no explanation. She was just gone. I looked everywhere for her. We just moved back to Wilmette, a suburb of Chicago, after an 11-month stint in New Canaan, Connecticut. and our house was full of unpacked boxes. Maybe she fell into one of the crates with all of our winter coats, I thought. I checked the attic, then the basement, then the garage. By lunchtime, I was panicking. No one would tell me where our mother had gone or when she'd be back. She would be back, right? Get in the car, Homer barked at me early that afternoon. Patty and I climbed into the back seat of the station wagon with a red vinyl suitcase between us. We had no idea where we were going or why. We watched out the windows as the elm trees lining the streets of our new neighborhood morphed into sorority and fraternity houses at Northwestern University's campus in Evanston, the jazz clubs, the carry-out joints of Rogers Park, and then the skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. Patty, who was 4 years old, growled a little, as she often did when she got nervous. "Cut that out," Homer snapped from the driver's seat as I absent-mindedly kicked the back of his seat. I could see his eyes darting back and forth in the mirror, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. The car was hot and sticky, and the afternoon sun was streaming in, hitting me right in the eyes. Homer weaved in and out of the lanes as we rolled down Sheridan Road onto Lakeshore Drive. The jerky motion was making me sick. We pulled up in front of a brownstone along Chicago's historic Gold Coast. The place looked a little haunted, built from big blocks of sand-colored stone, framed by a green turret and a black gate with sharp iron pickets. I grabbed the rail and we climbed the steep steps. Homer rang the doorbell. A minute or so later, a chubby man with a bristle of white hair and the roundest face I'd ever seen opened the door and told us to come right in. We followed him as he lumbered down the dark hallway. Even as the summer heat beat down on the city, the inside of the house felt cold and damp. It smelled like garlic. Homer put our suitcases down and made his way into the kitchen. "Should be just a few days," he told the man and his wife, a stern-faced woman with milk-white skin. The sleeves of her faded floral housecoat were too tight around her arms, and I could see her slip hanging down in the back. Patty and I didn't know what they were talking about, or much of anything about this man who lived in this dank, dark house, except that his name was Jack McIntyre, a.k.a. Jack Mac. Okay, that's it.
As a tiny little baby, Kathleen Ann Goiter was baptized right there on December 30th, 1939. Her roots, gasp. Her roots are steeped in Milwaukee's political and manufacturing history, something that you get by reading the book, and she grew up on West Wisconsin Avenue. As an adult, she moved to Appleton, where she became a storyteller throughout the community and then became an author too, first of children's books and later with published articles in Good Housekeeping and other regional magazines. Her book, Life in the Shadows, A Story of Resilience, came out as well earlier this year. She now lives in Denver with her husband. I didn't have his name, so I just put Mr. Martin. What's his name? Bob. Okay, Marty Martin. Please now help me to welcome to the lectern Katie Martin.
Well, thank you for having me. And it really is a thrill to be with you, Meg, a novice writer like me. So I'm going to read When Our Life Changed. This was in 1947. I was 7 years old. My sister was 9, and my brother was 6. In movies and novels, darkening skies, pounding thunder, howling winds generally mean trouble ahead. Nobody checked the weather that night. Maybe it was one of those hot, sticky Milwaukee summer evenings when a calamity blew in our back door, sucking tranquility out the windows. Minutes before, our life had been filled with giggles. Now we were gasping for air like guppies. My siblings and I were playing in the back room. I was gingerly cutting out the cutouts, staying within the lines. Elaine was nose deep in a Nancy Drew book, and Dick was playing on the floor with some soldiers. When we heard this crazed voice blasting through the door, "I'm telling you, somebody poisoned my beer." The voice raged at my mother. Mama's voice quivered as she tried desperately to control the situation. "What are you talking about, Bill?" Bam! His fist hit the table. "I told you, Olga. Some son of a bitch, they poisoned my beer." His body slammed into the chairs, knocking one over. He staggered around the kitchen, threatening, shouting, stamping back and forth, his fists pounding the table. Bam, bam. My siblings and I tiptoed to the door, opening a crack. Fear grabbed our bodies. Stomachs were churning. My brother and I huddled under our older sister's protective wing. We saw that the madman, eyes bulging, appeared to be our father. He had the same tall, slim build, but those eyes were hard like black marbles. His body swayed back and forth, unable to walk in a straight line. He yelled, "God damn it, I told you when I went to the bathroom and came back, my beer was switched. It was poisoned." His fist slammed the table and pummeled the back of the chairs. As he came closer to Mama, she backed into the wall, her hands shaking as she held them up for protection. Who'd want to poison our dad? He worked in a candle factory, but beer was served at lunch there. After all, Milwaukee, Wisconsin was the beer capital of the world. "Who would poison Daddy?" I squeaked. "Shh," my sister said, her brown eyes wide in fear. "Bill," Mama pleaded. "Stop pacing. Sit down. What are you trying to tell me?" She tried pushing a chair toward him. "God damn it, Olga, I told you I was poisoned. Don't you ever listen?" Spit was flying from his mouth as he turned and jerked away from Mama. He stumbled out the back doors, slamming the door behind him. My mother picked up the phone that sat in a hallway alcove, and she called the family doctor. Dad returned thundering through the back door. It seemed like an eternity. "Please, God, help us," I kept praying. Dr. Torr arrived. He didn't even ring the doorbell. He just rushed right in. Between Dad's crazy rages, the doctor worked to try to ascertain what was happening. He was very calm. He tried to soothe him. "Take my pee and analyze it," my dad would cry. The doctor listened intently, trying to calm Dad, but there was no consoling him. Maybe he told him that they would take his urine to the hospital and take a sample. I don't know. The police were called. I don't think they rang the doorbell either. They marched right into the kitchen. One cop grabbed my dad's right arm, the other cop grabbed the left arm. "Leave me alone," he cried. "Get away from me. You can't take me anywhere." He was shouting like his life depended on it. They dragged him out the front door, down the steps to the squad car, his feet barely touching the ground. He was screaming like his life was like a frightened child. No, let me go," he cried. They pushed him into the back seat of the squad car and drove down Wisconsin Avenue. I flung open the window and screamed. "Don't hurt my daddy. Let him go. You're hurting him. Stop. Please, bring him back. Don't hurt his arm." Only minutes before, I'd been praying for somebody to help us, and now I was screaming to let my father go. Children, unconditional love comes pouring forth. My dad was taken to the Milwaukee County Hospital. Mama told us the doctors would give him a mental examination. We had no idea what that meant, a mental examination. We knew something was wrong, he was different, but doctors would fix him. Somewhere that evening, children were being tucked into their beds, loving fathers pushing back their hair, kissing their foreheads. Somewhere in the world, children were wondering what had happened to their vanquished families. Could there have been families experiencing the same horror we were? On Wisconsin Avenue in 1947, 3 sorrowful children huddled together in one bed, holding hands, praying, "Please, God, make this nightmare disappear." My father was diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic and an alcoholic. Our life was never copacetic after that.
I didn't realize until I watched you right now that what you just did, telling that story at the lectern, was just filled with so much meaning, because we're talking about how at that time mental illness was meant to be kept a family secret. And now you've read it and you've shared it just like we do the scriptures on a Sunday morning. And it kind of leads into my first question, which is about, you both grew up in families in faith communities, and so I want to ask both sides of the coin here. In what ways do you think your growing up in a faith community encouraged you to stay quiet about what was going on at home?
It was a secret. We never talked about it, so I thought it must be a secret
keep it
because
really
nobody
close.
ever talks about it. Does it listen now?
You just have to keep it really close and point
Okay.
it at you.
Nobody ever talked about it. I'm 83 years old. Never, ever, ever was I going to tell anybody about my father. Never. But I feel so strongly about the closing of the mental health facilities, and I felt the only way I can tell this story, to tell people about it, is what it's like to live in a family with mentally ill people. Coming to Redeemer Church was our safe, quiet, peaceful haven. It was a safe haven here. I felt loved. The people were wonderful to us. And sometimes we even came back Sunday evening, and it was just wonderful to be a part of it. I used to look up at that ceiling and think it was a rowboat that was tipped over and dumped all the people in the pews, including us.
That's so great. Well, my grandmother, who wasn't from Ireland, her father was, but she thought she was, and she spoke with a brogue, which was weird because she grew up in Michigan. Anyway, she had her favorite expression whenever we would complain, which was often, was to offer it up to the poor souls in purgatory. And it was meant that, you know, the more you suffered, the more likely it was that your dead ancestors could get out of purgatory and into heaven. So we kind of felt like we had an obligation to stay silent. And compounding that, you know, the nuns taught us all about the saints. And they had a book in our class that you could leaf through, and you were encouraged to pick out a favorite saint. And the common thread, well, there were all kinds of clever ways that they were mutilated and died, these horrible deaths, which we thought was so cool. You know, we couldn't wait to pick our way to, you know, be martyred. But the common thread was that they kept their suffering silent. So the saint that I picked was Saint Teresa, the little flower. And I think her feast day might be today. Something popped up on my Facebook, but maybe it was like the Russians listening to me talk about her. But anyway, Saint Teresa had consumption or some illness that caused her to cough up blood. And our third grade nun, Sister Mary David, used to tell us in great detail how she never blabbed about that. She kept that secret and how noble that was. So I learned early and often, as we say in Chicago, to stay silent about our pain especially.
And Katie, I think you talked about the good parts of being in a faith community and how that helped you survive along the way. But I want to put that part of the question to you, Meg. How was it helpful to be in communities of faith when you're grown up?
Sure, thank you for that. It was very helpful. So even though that what I just said earlier might contradict that, I felt very lucky to grow up in the parish I did. I have a friend here, right here today. My pal Katie is here, and she was in the same parish as I, and we've talked a lot over the years about how really it was an extended family. So I loved going to Mass. I still do. It was a source of great peace for me. I think the whole narrative about Jesus suffering and dying appealed to me, that we are meant to kind of find triumph in our suffering and are called to help one another. So that was a message that was imparted also early and often. And the parish to us was indeed an extended family. So while we didn't necessarily share our deepest secrets with one another, like at all, we found ways to be in community and have a lot of fun together, that's for sure.
I just have to say one more thing. When we were growing up here at the church, we had a deaconess, Sister Bertha. And I don't know if she knew our situation, but I felt that she was always really kind to us and made us feel very special, my sister and me and my brother.
And I've got my own, so but I'm wondering, now I just learned that you were also a Sunday school teacher, but I wonder if there are particular Bible passages or stories that kind of nestle in your heart, either because of your upbringing or just 'cause.
Well, one thing I did was I wrote a Christmas pageant, because we were the Sunday school teachers for the first graders, and we called it Cloud 9. We had clouds painted on the walls and everything. And so I did this Christmas pageant, and it was a song, and I wish I could remember the name of the book that was just a song telling the story of the birth of Jesus. So I had all the little kids tell the story. And the boys, or not boys, but whoever wanted to be a sheep, they had long underwear with cotton stuck on it. And my son, who was in the audience, was one of them. He remembers wearing that. My mother made the costumes. But the story was told so simply, and I thought it would be much more meaningful to the children to use that children's story from that book.
Mm-hmm. And you've led me right into the next question. Just kind of noting, all of us are thinking about Thanksgiving is next week, and the pressures of the holidays and the joy of the holidays too. It's so wonderful, but it really, I think, puts any family kind of in a crucible. It's everything is very concentrated. So I wondered if you might share a little bit about what holidays were like for you growing up under the circumstances.
Ooh-wee. They were wild. So my mom had the very bad idea to have our family picture taken every Thanksgiving morning. So they hired this photography company, Peter Pan, who came, and they specialized in taking large family portraits. And in our parish, that was, everybody had tons of kids. I don't know how the heck they wrangled everybody together without killing each other, but I do remember my mother many Thanksgiving mornings chasing me around the dining room table to cut my bangs for the picture. But then, I have pretty happy memories of Thanksgiving. Christmas was especially exciting because we got to go to midnight mass. And I think my parents would get very hammered. They were, and then later on, as we grew older, I confess that when I was walking up to communion, I might have been stumbling a little bit myself. But it was, it was exciting, but at the same time, nervous, anxious. I mean, there's a lot of pressure that surrounds the holiday, and I think if you're already strained by people in your family living with mental illness, that's the anxiety and the tension of that mounts. I write about this a little bit in the book. I was my junior year of college, I spent the first semester in Vienna, Austria, which was really exciting, and I was very much looking forward to it, but the minute I got over there, I was really homesick. And I've come to learn that people that grow up around a lot of trauma, they develop this kind of hypervigilance, need to be around home. They're worried about what's going to happen. Anyway, so I was very homesick, so I concocted this great story where I was going to come home like on the King family Christmas special that they showed on PBS every year, and it was the King family singers, and there was a son who was away in the war in Vietnam, and he shows up to surprise his mother, and everybody's in tears, and it's all very romantic. So I had the vision for that same entry for myself coming home from the semester abroad, and I went through this elaborate plan where I was going to come home early and surprise my mom and dad. And when I did come home, my sister Mary Kay picked me up at the airport and told me I could see right away that something terrible had happened. And what had happened was that our sister Nancy had attempted to kill herself yet again. And she was in the hospital, and it was not going to be this warm, fuzzy Christmas greeting. So that was a sad memory, but I think it's something that is important to acknowledge, that a lot of families are going through trouble at that time, and find your way to be helpful to them.
Well, I remember our Thanksgivings where my mother would invite everybody that didn't have a home. And it would be our blind uncle, it would be a bachelor uncle, it was an aunt that her name was Hildegard. And when we were kids, we decided her name was too long. And my sister designated me to tell her that we were no longer going to call her Aunt Hildegard, and we were going to call her Auntie. And she was sitting in the front seat of this car. We were waiting for her to come out of the house. And she turned around, and very wrecked neck, her nose up in the air. I was frightened to death what she was going to say, and she looked at me and she said, okay. It was all right. Our Thanksgivings, I remember, were pretty good because my father would sit by the piano and play. That is one thing he had, was a musical talent. He couldn't read a note, but he could hear the songs, and he could play anything. He'd hear a song, and he'd start playing it with his right hand. Then he'd have the left hand going and the foot pedal. And so then it was a joyous time because, well, we felt safe that we could sit next to him and sing songs with him. But I was going to read to you about the Christmas.
Great.
Christmas was a very special time in Milwaukee. I felt Milwaukee did a lot for children. There was always the windows down at Gimbel's and Boston Store full of whimsical characters. And of course, we loved the Schuster's Christmas Parade because it was just full of enchantment. And I felt nothing ever could spoil Christmas. It would be a wonderful time. I have to find that page. So we were very excited to come to Redeemer Church on Christmas Eve because it was always beautiful. My mother had made us new dresses. We were all dressed up with it, and we had our new Buster Brown shoes. My brother had new clothes. We clambered out of the car to get into the church. Sunday school kids had to meet in the respective classrooms. Aunts, uncles, and mama. Parents were seated in the church. At the signal, the organ would pound. It came upon a midnight clear. All the kids entered the church with their teachers. 2 by 2, we marched down these aisles. When we got to the back and we turned around, I held my breath. I stared in wonderment. Shivers ran up and down my arms. I couldn't believe the magnificent altar. Green pine trees were interspersed with glittering white trees cascaded across the whole altar. There were red poinsettia plants splashed across the front of the communion rail. It was like God's special garden. I actually thought I'd probably see God perched on the altar. Upon entering my pew, I would twist around and couldn't stand still. My pigtails were flapping in my face. I was making sure that everybody could see me. I tried to settle down, but everybody was jumping up and down. Each class had a special song to sing. The very young always sang Away in the Manger with their hand motions, Little Town of Bethlehem. Everybody sang Joy to the World, and then it was our turn. We came up to sing The Little Drummer Boy. You knew each word placed you in Bethlehem. You were gathered around the shepherds, Mary and Joseph, watching baby Jesus. I could never figure out why I was never chosen to be Mary. I knew God heard my voice reverberating through the airwaves. The children's cheerful voices filled me with a sense of oneness, enhancing the mystery of Christmas. These memories are stored deep in my heart, and when the service ended, We kids marched back to the Sunday school through that door. We were each handed a Christmas sock full of candy, the kind he didn't like, but I knew my dad would eat it. All our aunts and uncles would come to our house. It was tradition. Mama had prepared the traditional tartare sandwiches on Milwaukee's rye bread, covered with a big slice of raw onion. Of course, there was stollen and pecan fingers and our brightly decorated Christmas cookies. We spent hours decorating them. Mama would let us lick the beaters of the famous eggnog that she would make, but we never got to taste the finished product like you did. When the rum was added, we didn't get it. Dashing from the car, we were eager to see if Santa had arrived. Dick and I screamed upon entering the front door. Rex, our dog, was laying there, blood rushing out of his nose. "He's dead," we screamed. Dad was sitting hunched over the piano bench, smoking, slurring his words. "He's okay. The damn dog ran out in front of the car." "You killed him," I shouted in his face. "Rex hates you. He's probably trying to get away from you." I was sobbing now, my hands clutched in tight fists. Now my mother and her relatives entered, and my dad saw this. He silently slipped out of the room and went down the basement. Dick and I lay down to Rex, cradling his head, petting him. I looked out the front window. Across the street, there were Christmas lights burning. It was Christmas over there. I looked to the left. It was Christmas at the Fitzpatrick house. I looked over to the right. It was Christmas at the Myers house. But at our house, Christmas was over. I'll let you know, Rex did survive. He was a survivor just like us. He was the perfect, imperfect dog for an imperfect family.
So, can I just say something about Rex? I love Rex.
I love Rex
and,
too.
Oh my God. So I don't know if anybody's read or listened to Lessons in Chemistry with the dog. Anyway,
Yes.
Rex was her version of the dog from Lessons in Chemistry.
6:30, yeah.
Totally saved the day. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, so that's one of many reasons to pick up the book today. If you haven't read it already, Katie's book. Rex is an incredible character in that whole story. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit so that you can talk about your experiences of having loved ones and family members who at times it just wasn't safe for them to stay in the home with you. So I'm talking and shifting to talking about institutionalization. And Meg, a moment ago you did mention that you lost one sister to suicide. Later you would also lose a brother, and your mother had an attempt. I wanted to point out that that's another area where for way too many years churches have surrounded that horrific tragedy that families go through with shame and silence. It is interesting to me that there are only 2 mortal humans that are acknowledged in this big sanctuary. One is the first pastor, so there's a plaque for him over there. But the other one is a wood engraving over here on the door, and there used to be organ pipes behind there. And so it is a tribute to a woman named Gertrude Nunemacher. So the Nunemacher Tanning family. And she was married to William Schuchart, who was the architect of this church. And her family gave a lot of money for the church. She was an incredible art collector. And I found out just a few years ago that she also died by suicide. It means something to me that the congregation would make a tribute to her life forever and give thanks for the wonderful person that she was right here in this sanctuary. So turning now to solutions that society has tried out in the past and where we are now. I think the 2 of you are excellent people to ask for your opinions from your experience and your experience also as a journalist as well, as to, what ought society be doing for those who need the most serious levels of help day to day?
Well, how much time do you have?
We have plenty, actually.
We're here until Saturday. What we need to do is everything, but it really starts out in the most fundamental way, and that is acknowledging all of our humanity and really letting people be mentally ill, have mental illness, meet them where they are. Don't hurry them through telling their story about that. Don't judge them. Don't think it's their fault. It's not a moral failing. It's not their parents' fault. It just is who they are, how God created them. So that sounds very squishy, but I really believe that if we start from that point, that we're gonna find better ways to care for them. The week before my brother Danny died, he sent me a letter and acknowledging his mental illness. And Danny, we had known for years that Danny had a profound amount of mental illness, but it was something he would never acknowledge himself. So when he sent me this letter, it was quite noteworthy. And he said in it, it's a terrible thing to live with mental illness. It causes you to think and act in awkward ways, and I've done so many things that I'm ashamed of. And he said, really, only love and understanding can conquer this disease. And when he said that to me, I thought, woo, that sounds so cheesy. Like, are you working for the Hallmark card industry? But after he died, and I had so much time to reflect on that, it's really the perfect algorithm. You know, if you love somebody, you will want to understand them. And when you understand them, you're going to know what they need to have to live a better life. And so I wrote that down, and I put it on an index card, and I taped it to the side of my computer in the newsroom at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and that became my battle cry for the next 25 years, you know, writing about how we don't care for people who suffer in the same way that we do. There's so much discrimination. So when you ask Lisa about solutions, you know, it's everything from needing more doctors and mental health professionals to care for them, to providing more robust insurance coverage to help them pay for that, to places where they can go to be cared for, because we closed all the asylums for a lot of good reasons, but we didn't figure out a good way to provide care for them in the community. So there are, you could write a whole book.
Yeah.
You could write
2 books.
20 books about, yeah, you could write a whole library about what is needed, but where I really think it starts is acknowledging the humanity in everybody living with mental illness and letting them tell their story.
Well, from my perspective, we were very lucky. I felt we were very fortunate that our father was, I don't want to say incarcerated, I also want to say that he was committed to the Milwaukee County Mental Health Facility, where he lived for 25 years.
And he didn't have to commit himself, right?
No.
In those years, somebody could.
2 people had to do it. So for 5 days of the week, we had some sanity in our life. Our father was never just left at the Milwaukee County Hospital. He came home every weekend, holidays, special times. In the beginning, because he was still so violent and had rages, when he would come out the door, he'd take the pills and throw them in the bushes, or he'd step on them, and we'd think, oh, what a weekend this is going to be. Will we get him back in the car to take him back on Sunday night? And for some reason, he always did go back. My father was very resourceful, and over the years, as he took the medication, and they have to take the medication or it's useless, he could check himself out. Well, at this time, I lived 2.5 hours north of Milwaukee. I lived in a small town of 6,000 people called New London. It was Christmas time. I took an extra job in Appleton, which was 19 miles away, at a department store just a couple nights a week to earn money for Christmas. So that night, it was 10 below zero. I almost didn't go to work because I thought my car wouldn't start, but I did. And one of my sons came with me because he always liked to look at all the technology and everything. Later years, I found out he was really looking at a girl. But I got to work, I went downstairs, and I thought, well, I'm really delusional. I think I see my father. My father lives at the Milwaukee County Mental Health Facility, doesn't have any money, doesn't have a car. So I went and got my son and I said, go look and tell me, is that your grandpa? And he said, yep, that's him. So I had to tell my boss, I have to go home. My father, who lives in Milwaukee at the Milwaukee County Mental Health Facility, is standing downstairs, and I have to take him home. When I got him in the car, I said, I almost didn't come to work tonight. What would you have done? He said, well, I'd have just gone to the police station. They'd have brought me to your house. What he did is he bummed some money off of one of his twin brother. He took the city bus to the Greyhound station, rode the Greyhound station to Appleton. At Appleton, he had to ask the bus clerk there where this department store was, and he walked all the way 10 below zero to the store. And I had just had a baby, and he wanted to see the little guy. So that really chipped away at my ice-encased heart. But I just don't understand. I don't know if you have somebody that is severely mentally ill that can't live in your home and has to take medication. They have to be in a place where somebody is monitoring it. So I'm hoping that new medication and everything, people can just come to a clinic and say, I need help. But I look around and I see a lot of these homeless people, and I think a lot of these people are mentally ill. Why are they mentally ill? I also belong to a Lutheran church in Boulder, and the women's prison wanted to have some of us come for a service they were conducting at the prison. So I went. I was curious. There were probably 12 inmates and 10 of us. And the service went fine. And afterwards, the chaplain took us out for coffee and cake. And I was curious, what did these women do? Well, some women had committed crimes. But some were mentally ill. And I couldn't believe that they were in prison just because they were mentally ill. And immediately I thought of my father, and I thought, it was an old place, the Milwaukee County Mental Health Facility. It was old and worn like the people inside, but it was beautiful outside. That green grass, there was a makeshift pond down there. And he could go out and walk after a while. You know, he took a lot of walks. So when I heard that the mental health facilities were closed, I was enraged. All I could think about were families. What are they doing? Who's helping them? Is there insurance to help them? My mother had to go every year. They would check her salary, and she supported all of us, and she had to pay a portion to the hospital. She didn't realize she could have had Title 19. But at the end, she finally found that out. But in all these 25 years, she was paying for it. I don't know what people do, and I felt the only way I could tell this story to let people know how severe a problem this is to take care of mentally ill people is, gosh darn, I had to tell my story. For 83 years, I never told anybody, never, ever talked about it. If you met me on the street and talked, you would have thought my father was dead. Never did I ever talk about it. It was a secret, I guess. So
And then
I hope that's why I'm writing the book. I hope we can bring attention to the need for mental health help.
Right, and Meg, a lot of your work was looking at what happened after those facilities closed, and maybe you want to say a few minutes about
Sure,
what you...
so yeah, this is kind of what I call like the third rail of mental health discussion, because it's so electric. You know, when you touch it, you get a shock. There is great need for a safe facility for people who are profoundly mentally ill and dangerously ill. That's not anything that we are comfortable talking about. There is a big effort in the mental health community to underscore the fact that people with mental illness are not inherently violent, and that's true. They're more likely to be a victim of violence than commit violence. That said, there are some people who, by virtue of their illness, are dangerous. They will have delusions or feel the need to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. They hear voices in their head telling them to do that. It's very rare, but it's there. So we do need to acknowledge that. Now, it used to be way too easy to commit somebody to a long-term facility, and there were all these exposés in the 1940s and 50s about the horrific conditions, and then it was the guy who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Ken Kesey, is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ken Kesey, who was an orderly in, was it Oregon? I think it was Oregon. And so his book, which was written actually in the 50s, but made into a movie, it was written in 1962, and it was made into a movie that came out in 1975. That was really a cultural touchstone that added great fuel to the public opinion that mental facilities are inherently wrong. At the same time, there was great effort by politicians to move away from their responsibility, their fiscal responsibility. Running facilities are very expensive. So when John Kennedy signed the Mental Health Act of 1963, it was transferring responsibility from individual states to the federal government. And then what happened was he was assassinated, of course, and a lot of the interest in mental health reform died alongside him, and therefore what they promised, which were these community mental health facilities in each area, these catchment areas, never came to be. And so we closed down the facilities, but didn't build the community centers to support people. So they ended up in ratty little single-room housing, or on the streets, or in jail and prison, or nursing homes. And so we basically effectively abandoned people with serious mental illness. So we need something to address that population. You're seeing it now with homelessness on the streets that's paralyzing cities like San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York, but even smaller cities, Portland, Maine. I was in Burlington, Vermont this summer. That's the last place you would think would have a huge homeless population, and they do. And it's a tragedy. So we definitely need to figure out a way to provide comfort and safety and the basic human needs. You know, my editor at the paper used to say, if we were writing about dogs, people would really be motivated. You know, everybody's wanting to contribute to, rescue a puppy, but people on the street, they will walk past and look the other way. And so that, I think, again, I'm kind of repeating what I said earlier, but when we start looking at people struggling with mental illness as human beings, as our brothers and sisters, then we'll be, much more motivated to find solutions for them.
So you had a lot of commonplaces in your two books, and so I was curious about what you would want to ask of one another if you had the opportunity. Now, the second these two saw one another, they started immediately, la 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 la. So I don't know what you have left, but if you wanted to ask a question of each other about what it was like to grow up, or things in the book that you found that you wanted to hear more about.
Yeah, I was just blown away when I read Katie's book because it was so familiar to me. And my mom's family, I'm sure they knew your family. They had to have. My mother's maiden name was Gutenkunst, which my dad used to tease her and call her Jean Dirty Word. And she'd be like, it means art. Anyway, but what I was thinking as I was reading your book, Katie, all along was, how did you have the strength? So my mom had struggled, and my brothers and sisters, but I think it's when it was your father, that's such a central figure. But I'm curious about what, we both dealt with a lot of humiliation and shame, because my brother Danny was right. People who suffer from mental illness they do act and say outrageous things that are, it's very embarrassing. I noticed that in your book so much, where you talked about being so embarrassed and not mentioning him to anybody. But what I want to know is you still loved your dad greatly. And so how could you look past his illness and the things that he did that hurt you to still love him?
That took many years. I was very angry with him because he did humiliate it. I'd be walking home from school with my friends, and he'd jump out from behind a tree and grab us because he was tall and slim and you never saw it coming. Or he'd be always coming through the window. I don't know why he was always using the windows. But he was always coming through the windows. And I had turned the basement into a place where my friends could come. I bought a jukebox for $25.
That was a lot of money.
It was, right, and it was a beautiful jukebox. I would like to know where it is now. And we were playing cards one night. It was underneath right by the wall, and all of a sudden we heard this noise, and it wasn't the jukebox. The window opened up, this long leg came through, fell on the card table. It was my father. I was so embarrassed. They had to hold on to the table because he was a 6'2" man. I took all my friends and said, up the stairs, out, you have to leave now. But our mother was very strong. My mother never ever said the words mentally ill. Nobody ever said the words mentally ill, especially paranoid schizophrenic. My sister told me, I think I was in my 20s, that our dad was diagnosed this. And I said, oh my, because I knew he was an alcoholic. Don't tell anybody. Now we've got this too. It was so embarrassing. My mother I never saw her feel sorry for herself. And it was the church. She was so involved here. She loved the church. She loved cooking for this church. So she gave us a very strong role model to follow. And I think, it took me a long time before I could forgive him. And when I got married, we brought him home, and of course, he came to the wedding. And he used to be a really great dancer, and he asked me to dance, which really surprised me. And he was still a smooth dancer, and we were dancing and across the floor and all that. And he started singing, "You Are My Sunshine." And I was just shocked. And I almost stopped in my tracks, and I thought, why is he singing this song to me? Does he really love me? I thought, we're just survivors. Isn't love for somebody else more fortunate? Did he really have some feeling for us? And it made me wonder what we had all missed by his illness. What would he have been like if he could have been helped sooner in life? And it scarred us. I had very low self-esteem, hated to do what I'm doing right now, could never talk in front of a group. And then I became a storyteller, and I thought, what am I doing up here? I don't like doing this. But I only did it for children because they're very honest. They'd say, that story stinks, so I'd never do it again. And I felt good about that. But at first, when I started doing storytelling, I had my children help me. And this one woman insisted that I do this women's group. And I said, I don't do older people. I didn't have stories. And my daughter helped me. She did the pantomime, so she didn't talk. So I said, okay, I will do it. I'll do one story. It was a new story. And I came out, and I looked at a person. She had this mad look, and I thought, oh, she hates me. I hadn't even started talking yet. I couldn't even think of the story. I couldn't think of the name of it. I looked at my poor daughter. She wasn't talking. She was in shock. What should we do? I saw the exit sign. I thought, oh, just give them their money back, leave. And I thought, no, you can't do it. So I apologized. I said it was my first time doing this, and I could tell the story. But never, ever, ever again did I tell stories for adults. It was only children, because they're so honest.
Did you have a question for Meg?
Yes. How did it affect you?
How did it affect me? Wow. Well, again, how much time do you have? You know, I'm an optimistic person. I am. Maybe that's because I'm the middle kid in that big family and I got away with murder. And I think life is easier when you kind of look at it as the glass being half full. So I'm grateful that I came from the family I did. I'm so proud of my brothers and sisters and so grateful to them for having the faith in me and the courage to let me tell this story in the way that it really needed to be told, I think, with unvarnished honesty. I think that it made me more compassionate or more empathetic to the sufferings of others. I saw so early on how people struggled, you know, watching my sister unable to get out of bed and my mom with a faraway look in her eye, and later on, you know, Danny's real struggles. You can't help but see the humanity in and the suffering in other people. I think also I was going into my senior year of college when my sister died, and that was a great lesson for us on how short life is. So, you know, our big expression in our family is, well, nobody's dead, you know, or if they're not bleeding or in prison, we'll take jail even. But prison or bleeding, then you're probably going to be okay. So I think it just gave a sense of proportion to what life hands you and gratitude. I mean, I think if anything else, I feel mostly just gratitude for the lessons that brought me, living, you know, as I did, surrounded by people with mental illness. I tried to paint this book like I was the Marilyn Munster in the family. Do you know that show, The Munsters? And Marilyn is the normie. She's like the blonde that's real pretty. And so anyway, my brothers and sisters were like, no. You know, we all got affected by this. And so we certainly did. So again, I think I don't want to sugarcoat it all the way. There's a lot of pain. I think I was a hyper-vigilant mother because I was always afraid that my kids would fall into the same trap. And so I was, you know, a little more anxious than the average mom, maybe, but mostly I feel empathy and gratitude.
Thank you. That's a great time for us to pause and thank our authors. And I'm sure you're eager to ask your questions, so your choices are to either come to this microphone here, or I will hover nearby with this one if you'd like me to bring it to you, and then our authors can go to the lectern to answer any questions. Do we have questions for Meg or for Katie?
So given that mental illness, as you said, is how God made you, and given that the unfortunateness of cancer or any of those things is how God made you, tell us your experience of how they compare and contrast. I'm thinking of Nancy specifically.
Oh, sure. So how the experience of having cancer and how the
world sees you.
Oh, right. Well, good news for me. I did have cancer. I did. I mean, and I'm here to tell you about it. Actually, this is November, 14th? So I think this is I was diagnosed in 2006 in November. So I think this week is like my 16th anniversary. Woo, woo, yay. I'm here to tell you about it. Anyway, when I was diagnosed, they gave me the world. You know, they said, here is somebody who's going to be in charge of your care, and this person is called your journey coordinator, and they will help you if you need to go for a ride for your chemo, or here's when your hair falls out. It's cold in January in Milwaukee, especially when you don't have any hair. So here's a hat that the ladies' auxiliary has knit for you. And they gave me this cloth bag so I could keep all my papers together. I called it my tit kit because I had breast cancer. Anyway, and I thought, like, you are the nicest people in the world, and I feel like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. You know, I'm just being so well cared for. At the same time, I was writing all these stories about the abysmal housing conditions for people with severe, persistent mental illness. And I thought, you know what? I don't need a journey coordinator, but the people who I'm writing about do. They sure do. They need people to give them rides for their appointments, and they need clothes, and they need all the basics. So there's a great disparity. You know, they have the breast cancer walk every year. There's jewelry. You can get jewelry with a pink ribbon. And people with mental illness didn't get any of that. They call it the no casserole illness, because people don't show up at your door when you have bipolar or depression or schizophrenia. It's hushed about. So that's changing, and it's changing in large part because of the good work of NAMI and other organizations that are really bringing out of the shadows, you know, the people living with mental illness. So we still have a very long way to go, but we're catching up. So yeah, great disparity between mental illnesses and other illnesses. Good question, Mo. Thanks.
Do you have any, based on, this is for either of you, from your life experience, do you have any tips or thoughts about how to help a friend or a relative who is going through an intense experience of mental illness? Maybe they lost a child to suicide and they have anger, or maybe they're facing a situation in which they don't, your friend or relative doesn't really know what to do with a child who is maybe a little bit of a danger either to themselves or others. And any thoughts about how a friend can help support another person who is confronting this issue in their family?
Okay, this is one of my favorite questions. Thank you so much for asking that. Yeah, so it starts out very simply, and that is to let that person talk. So I really think that we haven't, in American society, with our inclination to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, rugged individualism, just do it, we don't make space. We don't make the space that we need to have these conversations, both if we're the ones struggling with somebody in our family or we're in need of help from others. So it takes great courage and takes great humility to say, I need help. This is something that my older brother Jake excels at. So my older brother Jake lives in a group home for people with serious mental illness in Skokie, Illinois, and he is my hero. Because Jake has always been very forthright about asking for help. And we are only too happy to give it to him because he's lovely. And so I think with a friend who is struggling and maybe has a child who is ill to the point that person might be dangerous, I think it's very important to be there for your friend and to help that person figure out how to get help for his or her child. That's a lot easier said than done because we don't have adequate numbers of practitioners. Again, insurance is really tough. The default is to call the police, and often that can end quite badly. But it's very important to let your friend know that you are there for him or her in any way, and let that person talk. It's so important. So NAMI has great resources for families. They have these family-to-family peer support and other programs to be supportive of families, and I would just encourage you to look into those. People are really starting to open up. It's very different from when Katie and I were coming up, and there's, all kinds of information available on the internet and support groups and yeah, just there are a lot of organizations that's their primary mission, is to help people in a crisis. But you're a good friend to wonder how you can help, and I hope that's specific enough, is to really let that person talk, because that person really needs to talk. And if you're providing that space for him or her, you're a very good person.
We probably have time for one more question.
Hi. Do you consider alcoholism a mental illness, or just because some people, they get very sedate when they drink, it's a depressive, and some get outbursts? I don't know if that's considered a mental illness.
I think it is a part of it. It's certainly an addiction. Everybody that I have talked to who had somebody, a child or a husband, that was an alcoholic, and they can't stop. They can't stop on their own. They have to have help. They need to have help from somebody to stop. And the editor that helped me with my book, her son was an alcoholic, and she said that is just as severe as my father that was a paranoid schizophrenic. And I'd never thought about it that way before. But I think it is. I think it's a form of it, and they definitely need help.
Agreed. It's also even classified in the DSM, the diagnostic manual for what's covered in it. Alcoholism is considered a mental illness, yeah.
So again, I want to thank you for coming. Thanks to Katie and to Meg for sharing their stories and their books with us. Like I said at the beginning, I am very blessed to serve a congregation like this one, where we can talk very openly, and we talk about it often, about mental health, which is kind of that day-to-day management of one's spirit and mental health and wellness overall, but also that this congregation is so dedicated to offering care for the neighbors that we've gotten to meet through our meals or other things. They've come here, they've gotten to know us, they feel like this is a trusted, safe place to be. So then to be able to recommend, hey, there's someone downstairs that you can talk to today if this is a tough day for you. That's kind of the dream of the mental health clinic that'll be administered by Bread of Healing, by the substance use disorder counseling that will happen through Serenity Inns, and through the presence of NAMI for trainings and maybe some small group exercises here at Redeemer. All of that goes under the umbrella of this strong woman that you heard about named Olga, Katie's mom. And so we've named a nonprofit Olga, and as you are on your way out today, stop by this table to say a personal word of welcome or a personal question for Meg or for Katie, and stop by here if you feel so moved to donate to Olga today. Thank you so much. I'm Pastor Lisa Bates-Froyland if you came in later, and so glad that you joined us here at Redeemer today. Thank you.